Good evening to both. And let's begin on the federal campaign push for a national energy corridor, a means of expediting pipeline construction and minimize dependence on the sale of oil to the U.S. market. Kathy, we heard perspective from industry expert Richard Masson off the top. What's to be made of election promises to ramp up the speed of infrastructure projects by designating an energy corridor?
I think what's to be made of it is exactly that, election promises. I think that the Conservatives particularly have pipeline envy because the Trudeau Liberals managed to actually get one all the way to Tidewater. And so they would like to say, we could do it too. But it is the political idea, I think, that's being sold here, that we need to be starting to look east and west. And that's part and parcel of the whole issue of decoupling ourselves from the trade corridor down to the U.S. And so it makes sense politically, maybe not quite so much economically.
Chaldeans, regardless of the party, to what degree do you feel policy like this is about shoring up support here in Western Canada, especially in Alberta?
Yes, it is part of the equation, Michael. But it's also linked to what is happening with Mr. Trump. He's targeting Canada, and tomorrow we will know more about what he's going to do on the tariff front. I think this is a move to change our north-south trade directionality and moving into a space where we do trade with other countries. So I think that the corridor concept makes sense. It is trying to, take advantage of the natural resources that we have. The Trudeau government killed 16 projects. Sure, they were very good with the TMX, and I give them credit for that. But they were very hostile to energy projects. So, yeah, the corridor concept, I think, which is being embraced by all the parties, is the way to go for Canada to tap into its natural resources and create jobs for our young people.
Kathy, there appears to be political motivation, political momentum, but taking it past the election, what do you think it would take to bring investors to the table, make this a reality?
Well, that's a good question. I think we might start to see, when you get it into the private sector, I think you might get to see some amount of morphing of the idea rather than a single huge pipeline going all the way to New Brunswick, for instance. We might see some proposals that will just swing that pipeline north of Lake Superior in Michigan so that it stays entirely in Canada, the one that already exists. So I think we might see something that's more of a piecemeal type of situation. I think we might also see some sort of, looking at things like electrical grid connections, which should be a little bit stronger east-west as opposed to the north-south situation they have now. Again, you'd have to have provinces on board for that because you're going to have to be hooking up utilities across provincial borders. So I think when we get to past the straight political side of it, you're going to get into some sort of nitty-gritty ideas that aren't quite as massive as that ginormous pipe all the way to New Brunswick.
All right. Still with the federal election, the first of the party leaders to campaign in our province arrived in Edmonton Monday evening, stumping for a local candidate and targeting Conservatives federally and provincially.
Daniel Smith cuts the things that you need, cuts healthcare. They cut education. Tricia knows that all too well. They cut, and it hurts people, it costs people. And they do all that just to give bigger and bigger gifts to their billionaire buddies. Pierre Poilievre's the same. Federal
NDP leader spent much of today in Edmonton making policy announcements, pushing back against what Jagmeet Singh calls the Americanization of healthcare. Chaldeans, why make the Alberta government a focal point of the campaign messaging? How far do you expect that to go in shoring up support for a party that is trailing by a considerable amount in the polls nationally?
Well, Michael, anytime you target the Alberta government, the UCP government, it is a calling card to progressives, try to mobilize progressives in Alberta. But look, Michael, the NDP has risks and opportunities here. The risks are the party could falter and fail to gain official party status. When you have the leader of the NDP, former leader Mo Kerr, telling people not to vote for the NDP, and here in Edmonton you have a former NDP MLA running under the Liberal label, you can see that they face serious challenges. But the opportunities are there because Mark Carney has moved into the political center, which is really abandoned the left flank to the NDP. So I think that we shouldn't write off the NDP completely. There's space there for them to develop a credible program targeting the vulnerable, targeting the need for social protection from the free market, defending the healthcare universality. So there's opportunities, but the question is, will Mr. Singh be able to exploit those opportunities in this campaign?
Kathy's surprised Jagmeet Singh would be the first of the federal leaders to campaign anywhere in this province. And what's that say to you about the NDP in Alberta?
Well, I think it's pretty interesting that he's here. I think realistically, if they do get down to single-digit seats, which we actually are seeing in some of the projections, he actually may be seeing that some of those seats could actually be in Alberta, that he might possibly have at least 2 seats here in Edmonton, partly because, frankly, particularly the federal Liberals have been pretty disorganized in how they've approached the organization in Alberta. I think they had written it off long ago, and now they're scrambling. They don't have candidates in some key ridings, and they've been swapping people around a bit. So I think they're looking at a very organized provincial organization here that they can do a little piggybacking on, that they can make connections with. So if you're suddenly Alberta becomes kind of fertile ground, if you think that you're absolutely in major trouble elsewhere in Canada.
Kathy, do you see a riding in Edmonton where the NDP could gain?
I don't know about gaining. I think certainly that's a good question. I'm not sure about gaining. The question becomes, will they hang on to Blake Desjardins' Highlands riding and McPherson's riding? It seems likely they'll hang on to McPherson's. I think Tricia Estabrook, good possibilities there, simply because the Liberals had been a bit disorganized and just rocketed somebody in there in the last week. So there is some possibility of gaining somebody there. So there's some potential. But I think then you look at the whole national appeal of the Liberals now, and whether people are going to go strategically on that basis, whether progressives will vote strategically, and it all goes up in the air again.
Regardless of the outcome of the federal election, Alberta's premier says she's striking a post-mortem panel to give Albertans the opportunity to raise issues they might want to put to a referendum.
I'm calling it now the What's Next panel. We just want to go around the province, see how people are feeling, and see if there are any other referendum issues that they want us to put on the table.
When asked about her support for separation, the Premier says she wants to hear from all Albertans on any issue, including leaving Canada. It was back in 2019. Then Premier Jason Kenney launched a 9-person Fair Deal panel to try to improve Alberta's standing and compensation. Kathy, what kind of tone do you see this setting for Albertans? And is there the appetite to spend taxpayer dollars on a panel traveling the province to generate grievances post-election?
Well, I mean, obviously it depends on the results of the election, and making an assumption that it is going to go Liberal. I think there probably is an appetite, particularly amongst Danielle Smith's supporters, that they would like to have their say, even though they may have lost at the national voters box. They want to be able to say, look, this is who we are, and we need some things from the Liberal government, and here's how we want to get them. I mean, I think that this is an outlet. It's a bit like the valve on a pressure cooker. There's going to be some discontent in the province if the Liberals win. And I think that this is one way that the provincial government can provide some outlet for that. Plus, also, obviously, it gives her some cues on what she should be looking at for the last 2 years of her own mandate.
Chaldeans, what's your read on motivation for such a panel? And how do you see this push comparing to the previous Kenney government's Fair Deal panel?
First of all, I think, Michael, I agree with Kathy. It is premature to be launching into this kind of post-mortem, approach. You have to wait for the elections to be finished. You don't know what is going to happen. This is early in the game. If you compare what happened with the Fair Deal panel, it was supposed to find Alberta's rightful place in Canada. They came up with a number of ideas: Alberta pension plan, the police force, changing equalization formula, etc. I know that, Michael, there hasn't been substantive development on any of these files, So I think this is essentially, I agree with Kathy here, it's a pressure cooker release valve, a release of frustration because of the way the election is going. But I think that indeed, if the results show that the Liberals are back in after 10 years, I think there will be a deep dissatisfaction, and there could be political consequences that come out of that.
Kathy, the Premier has been taking heat nationwide over election comments made to Breitbart News. That was earlier in March, then appearing at the PragerU fundraiser in Florida last week. How do you see this talk now of a What's Next panel playing into the federal election dialogue?
Well, I think that, for one thing, it brings some of it back home, because she has been very involved on the international stage and has taken some pretty big political hits, I think, because of that people feel she's not in her lane. So if she comes back to the concept that her lane is to fight Ottawa very specifically, then this is one way to do it, to bring out a panel like this and to get back to that sort of fundamental appeal that she has for Albertans, that she is Alberta's champion. And so she's going to, get the backing of her people. And let's face it, it's her people who will engage with that panel. It's not going to be progressives in the province. And with that backing, she's going to renew the fight, which is basically how she wins elections and how she continues on. I think that's really what's at stake here, is she needs to get back to some fundamentals.
Chaldeans, what degree of political risk might come with striking a panel like this? Does it risk ruffling feathers with Pierre Poilievre, with the federal Conservatives?
Not necessarily with Pierre Poilievre. I think it risks making Alberta again the perennial, black sheep of Confederation. And, is this going to lead to a referendum on separation? Are we going to go the Quebec route? I'm not sure. But certainly, there's a need in this current mood, when we need to build infrastructure and corridors for cooperative federalism. And I think the Premier has to hold her horses for a minute, let this election take place, and then let's see the outcome. Because I think what she's doing could actually hurt Poilievre, because the seats are in central Canada. And if the Liberals will use Alberta as the whipping tool to gain votes. So I think she has to just hold off and let things unfold, and then she can come back to channeling and articulating Alberta's demands as she's laid out forcefully.
Kathy, 15 seconds or less. Bottom line, does any of this mean Albertans should expect a referendum on separation?
I would say probably not. I would say that is a question that once it's been asked and answered, and I think we suspect that the answer is going to be no, she has nowhere to go from there. So I think we're not going to see a referendum on separation.
All right. We're out of time. Have to leave it there. Good to see you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.